So welcome. I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We're so glad that you can join us. I can't believe all the different countries, states being represented. I want to give you a heads up that this meeting is being recorded for people that couldn't join us today. That said, my name is Marnie Kaufman, and I am a co-founder and director of the Adenoid Cystic Carcinoma Research Foundation, or ACCRF. And I am incredibly excited to have so many people joining our inaugural webinar. Like many of you, I had to learn about ACC after feeling undiagnosed pain in my neck for over 12 years. In 2004, I was diagnosed with a tumor in my parotid gland that had invaded my facial nerve. I immediately had surgery to remove the tumor and the lowest branch of my facial nerve. And then I had 7 weeks of photon radiation. Whether you are an ACC patient, caregiver, family member, or friend, we're sorry that you have had to learn about ACC and become a member of what I call the club that you never wanted to join. But that said, we are really glad that you can join us today and learn more about what ACCRF is doing to try to help all of us. Could I have the next slide? To go through the agenda, after I give some initial thoughts, my husband Jeff will give you an introduction to ACCRF, followed by Dr. Nicole Spardy Burr, our Director of Research, who will be presenting on the ACC research landscape. Next, board member Douglas Meyer will lead a panel discussion of your questions. And while many of you submitted questions in advance, please feel free to continue to submit them during this webinar, as Dr. Bojo Todorich, another ACCRF board member, will be monitoring and recording them all. Finally, we will have a quick wrap up and a poll of future topics that you would like to see presented. Can I get the next slide, please? The purpose of this webinar is to introduce ACCRF and start a long-term dialogue where we learn what matters to you and we try to get you good answers. At ACCRF, we are focused on ACC research, and we couldn't do it without the support of our partner organizations and patient communities. The moderators and directors of these groups put in countless hours supporting ACC patients, caregivers, and their families. And while I can't even list them all, I would like you to know how much it means to us at ACCRF to know that groups like Salivary Gland Cancer UK, Brave Like Gabe, Kelly's Crew, and all the Facebook groups like ACCOI, ACC Warriors, ACC Survivors, Families and Friends, and ACC Sharing Info and Support are interacting with, supporting, and caring for the ACC community so competently and thoughtfully. I also want you to know that there are many different patient journeys. Whether you're newly diagnosed, finished with your treatment and just monitoring yourself with watchful waiting, experience recurrent or metastatic disease, we are here to support you. And also, please remember, don't assume the worst for yourself or your loved one. About half of ACC patients will not have recurrences or metastases. Since we don't know who those people will be, it is important to always be watchful and have regular follow-ups with your doctor. And also remember that this is not a cancer that can be passed down to your children and future generations. I tell you this as it's really important to keep all of this in mind as you watch Jeff and Nikki talk about ACCRF and its research efforts. Many of you are already cured and will not need the treatments that are the focus of ACC research. And we want that number to get bigger. We also want these ACCRF webinars to be about education and hope. So please help us help you. We'll be asking for your input via the chat and at the end of the webinar. And the legal folks tell me that I have to give a final legal disclaimer that ACCRF does not provide medical advice. So all treatment decisions should be discussed with an experienced physician. We cannot comment on anyone's individual case. Next slide, please. So here is a picture taken the day before my ACC surgery in 2004. Our boys were 9, 7, 4, and 1 years old. I begged a local photographer to come take our pictures because we were told that they didn't know how disfiguring the surgery would be. I was terrified. I honestly did not think I would be here today, but I am 17 years later and with so much more hope. When I was diagnosed in 2004, there was much less known about ACC. We saw upsetting statistics online and were desperate to learn what was being done to research the cancer. Unfortunately, Jeff and I quickly learned that because ACC is so rare, there was almost no ongoing research. In the United States, both the American Cancer Society and the National Cancer Institute hadn't funded $1 of ACC research. In our frustration, and with a great deal of hope, we formed the Adenoid Cystic Carcinoma Research Foundation, or ACCRF, at the end of 2005. A dedicated core of family, friends, and researchers jump-started a cutting-edge research effort. Since then, the generosity of ACC supporters like each of you has permitted a global network of brilliant ACC researchers to flourish. ACC was founded by patients and is led by patients, their caregivers, friends, and families. Every single thing that we do at ACCRF is critical for our patients. We understand the urgency behind finding better treatments and a cure for the disease. We understand fiscal responsibility and are an incredible lean and frugal charity. We have also been able to attract some of the absolute best oncologists in the world to guide our research priorities and conduct this vital research. I could not be more proud of our ever-expanding team and more hopeful for our future. With that said, I would like to introduce Jeffrey Kaufman, my better half, my husband, the father of our 4 boys, and the executive director of the ACCRF.
Thanks so much, Marnie, for that sweet introduction and for setting the important context for today's webinar. I totally remember the day we took that picture 17 years ago and just how terrified I was at the time. The fact is that our family has been one of the lucky ones, but we absolutely feel the urgency that only patients and their families can feel. Right now, I'd like to talk about how ACCRF has channeled that sense of urgency into a research effort that is transformational for patients. Next slide, please. ACCRF's mission is simple and clear. We seek to accelerate the development of improved therapies and a cure for ACC. But how do we achieve that mission? We believe that success will flow out of a pipeline of clinical trials based on the best available science. Patients will know if a treatment is really working only if it's rigorously tested and the proof is there for everyone to see. Now, good clinical trials don't just pop out of thin air. They must be cultivated and nurtured into existence. At ACCRF, the way we do that is by following a strategy with 3 pillars. First, we have seeded a community of researchers interested in ACC. Not so simple for a rare cancer. Second, that community is following a coordinated plan of action. And third, it is driven by supported and supportive patients. Next slide, please. I just mentioned a coordinated plan of action as part of our strategy at ACCRF. Well, that plan is developed in concert with the ACCRF Scientific Advisory Board that you see here. we've been remarkably lucky to gather some of the world's leading oncologists to help steer our efforts. They set strategy and review research proposals to make sure the most important research gets done. They're accomplished researchers for some of the world's leading cancer institutions: Johns Hopkins, Mass General, MD Anderson, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. The first member of our scientific advisory board, Dr. Ned Sharpless, had to step down a few years ago in order to become director of the National Cancer Institute here in the USA. That shows the caliber of scientists we've been able to attract to a rare cancer. We are incredibly grateful for the Scientific Advisory Board's volunteer service to ACC patients. Next slide, please. Earlier, I mentioned how our strategy involves creating a community of researchers. Well, here's a partial picture of that community. We have an ACC research network that spans patients, academic institutions, public and charitable funders, and private industry. ACCRF sits in the middle of that research ecosystem. We host scientific meetings, encourage and broker collaborations across the network. We manage our own preclinical drug screening platform, which is very unusual for a disease research nonprofit, and we provide grant funding to researchers. We act as the most informed facilitator in this ecosystem, building trust and making sure that everyone plays well in the sandbox together and shares what needs to be shared. Looking at the academic institutions on the left of the slide, only a few of which are listed here, we have made more than $12 million in grants to about 50 researchers at about 30 institutions. And it really is a global effort, as you can see that Australia, Germany, Korea, Netherlands, Sweden, the UK, and the US are included in that list of academic institutions, and there are more. We have managed to bring along government agencies and other charities to co-fund projects. And we've signed contracts with about 30 biopharmaceutical companies to bring in their drugs to ACCRF's preclinical drug screening facilities to see if the drugs are promising. At the end of the day, it is private companies that will run most clinical trials and will make and distribute the drugs that help patients. So it has been crucial to get companies interested in a rare cancer like ACC, and we've managed to do that. Next slide, please. Now let me turn to our research agenda. It's not an exaggeration to say that everything begins and ends with patients. Nothing can get done in research unless patients, like you on this call, this webinar, are involved. Donating specimens and medical records, providing funding, providing input on key research challenges and unmet needs, and enrolling in clinical trials. That's what's shown in the top row of the slide. Only once the patient community is involved in the research effort can scientists start to work their magic, as described in the middle section of the slide. At ACCRF, when we look at any research project, we figure out where it fits in one of 4 categories of projects, each of which asks a key research question. The first category of projects relate to the building blocks of research and answers the question, what can researchers work with to find answers? Only if researchers have access to biobanks and preclinical models can they hope to learn about ACC. The second category, on mechanisms of action, asks the question, what is the biology that makes ACC possible? Essentially, what are the Achilles heels of ACC? Then we turn to translational research, which asks, given what we know about what drives ACC, how do we stop it? How do we hit one of the Achilles heels? And lastly, the final goal of the research agenda is to reach clinical trials and figure out what will work in actual patients. While curing mice is fine, what we really want are better treatments and outcomes for patients. So, as I said, everything begins and ends with patients. Next slide, please. So I've described ACCRF's Scientific Advisory Board, our research network, and our research agenda. But what does it all accomplish? We think the answer is a lot. On this busy slide, I've laid out what the ACC research field looked like back in 2005 when we started ACCRF and where we are today. I won't go through it all, but I'll highlight a few points. The patient community has really stepped up and has donated more than $20 million to ACCRF. And we've been able to bring along other public and charitable agencies that have invested another $25 million in ACC-related research. Looking across biobanking, cell lines, and animal models, we've gone from essentially zero to a very comfortable position where researchers now have the tools to undertake ACC research. ACCRF's preclinical drug screening platform has allowed many drugs to work their way from academic and industry labs into clinical trials. Those clinical trials used to be few, small, and unrelated to ACC biology. Now there are many larger, science-driven trials that are leading to better patient outcomes. In short, the field of ACC research has been transformed over the past 16 years of ACCRF's existence. Next slide, please. I'd like to finish up with a hopeful picture of how the number of clinical trials has grown over the past decade. As I said at the beginning, we believe that the best way to accelerate the development of more and better therapies is to get more and better clinical trials. Thankfully, the engine of ACC research has been chugging along for a while now, and we're seeing the results. We believe patients should have justifiable hope that new discoveries will make their life journeys longer and happier. Now, I'd like to turn the presentation over to ACCRF's Director of Research, Dr. Nicole Spardy Burr, to discuss the landscape of ACC research.
Thanks, Jeff. It's such a pleasure to be here today. As Jeff said, my name is Nicole Spardy Burr. I did my training at the University of Pittsburgh and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where my studies focused on cancer genetics. But during my time there, it became really apparent that I wanted to be able to interact with patients more. And that's why I started at ACCRF. And it's such a pleasure to be able to speak with you all today. Next slide, please. So we're going to start at a high level here. I think Jeff ended on such a hopeful note, right? You see the sheer volume of clinical trials that have a good scientific rationale that are open to ACC patients or will open in the next year. And that really wouldn't be possible unless ACCRF invested heavily in the beginning on basic science projects. And two types of work like that include projects like biobanking, which are collecting tumors and other types of specimens from ACC patients, because researchers need something to perform characterization experiments. So things like DNA sequencing, RNA sequencing, they need to understand at the molecular level what has gone wrong to make a hypothesis to say, perhaps this is why the ACC tumors form. Another type of basic science project are model development, because once you have a hypothesis, you need a system to really test that scientific question and see whether you're right or you perhaps need to go back to the drawing board. These basic science type projects really led to the first major finding in 2009 that the highly recurrent alterations involve a gene called MYB. And we think that probably 80 to 90% of ACC patients harbor these types of mutations. MYB is a protein that's called a transcription factor. And without going into too much detail, I like to think of MYB as sort of a phone booth operator. It sits in the middle of the cell and it turns signals on and off. And we think these signals are involved in telling the cell to grow and divide and maybe not die, even though they've accumulated a lot of different mistakes. We were so lucky in 2011 for one of our grantees to publish the first mouse model of ACC. If you've read any of the work or looked at the website, you may see this referred to as patient-derived xenograft models, or PDX. And this model faithfully recapitulates the disease, which means the tumors look like ACC when they're grown. And they're a really important research tool because they allow us to screen anti-cancer drugs in the context of a whole animal model. And through our screening platform, we've looked at over 100 different anti-cancer agents. And data like this is what we call preclinical data. And it's a really important precursor step before you would ever consider putting a drug into ACC patients. And many companies will work with us as a first step to see whether their drug might be something you would consider for ACC. Together, both sequencing and drug screening efforts led to, in 2017, identifying activating notch mutations as a driver of aggressive ACC. We think these mutations happen in about 25% of recurrent metastatic patients. And because of our screening efforts, we helped to move along clinical trials that you may have heard of with notch inhibitors called AL101. Now, taking to today in 2021, we're hoping to expand our drug screening platform efforts, and we're piloting a 3-dimensional cell culture program. So here what you do is you take ACC cells, chop them up, and allow them to grow in a dish. Now, the real advantage of this is that you can, instead of testing 1 or 2 types of drugs at one time, you can now test maybe over 50 or 100 drugs. These experiments are cheaper, faster, and really allow you to expand the number of drugs that you're able to test at once. And this is very attractive to both academics as well as biopharma companies, and allows you to look a little bit earlier in drug development. Next slide. We thought it was important to really show you how ACCRF funds and invests in basic lab work all the way up to the clinic. And so here's a project that took many years and is in several stages, but I think it's a great example. So in the first stage, ACCRF gave a grant to Dr. Len Zahn at Boston Children's Hospital. And the goal of this grant was to find drugs that would inhibit MIB activity. He had a model in a zebrafish where he basically made it so that anywhere where there was MIB activity, the zebrafish model would glow. So the idea was you would treat this model, the zebrafish, with drugs and look and see where the glowing was reduced. And that would correlate with loss of MIB activity. From this screen, they found a drug called ATRA, a retinoic acid, and was able to reduce MIB signaling in that model. We helped Dr. Zahn to screen ATRA in a number of our ACC models. So that's in the middle portion of this panel. We tested ATRA as well as a related drug in these animals. And if you look at the graphs, you can see that the red and the blue lines are much more stable compared to the black line, which is the control. So basically what this means is that treatment of the animals with ATRA reduced ACC tumor growth in that model. Now, because ATRA is already approved for a subset of leukemia, this means that the dosing is really well understood, as well as all the safety and side effects. This allowed us to quickly translate that preclinical work into a clinical trial. With the help of the V Foundation, ACCRF co-funded a small signal finding trial at the Dana-Farber, which tested ATRA in recurrent metastatic ACC patients. This trial was reported recently. We saw that in a small subset of ACC patients, ATRA led to stable disease, and importantly, it was very well tolerated. That makes this drug a really good candidate to look for combination drugs that might actually increase the signal from stable disease to now perhaps tumor shrinkage. Next slide. Okay, so in this slide, we're going to go over sort of where we were, and where we are in terms of clinical trials. Now, this is a little bit of a busy slide, so I think at a high level, what we're trying to show in the gray column, these are all drugs that have been tested in ACC patients and are completed or reported in some type of publication. The blue column are all the open and pending drugs that are currently will be tested. And all of the drugs are binned according to their molecular target or their approach. So I think you can appreciate probably that there's a ton of activity in this multi-kinase inhibitor, which is the first row. This class of drugs inhibits a number of different proteins that we believe are active in ACC tumors. You might recognize some of the names of these drugs. So for example, lenvatinib. We believe lenvatinib has shown the most activity so far in ACC patients. There were 2 trials done, one in the United States, one in Italy. And within those trials, about 10 to 16% of ACC patients that were treated with lenvatinib experienced what's called a partial response. And that's defined as those patients showed 30% or greater tumor shrinkage. Another drug you may be familiar with is apatinib or rivoceranib. This drug was tested in ACC patients in a Chinese trial where they saw almost 50% of patients have a partial response. There's currently a copycat trial that is being performed in the United States to really test whether those results are reproducible. And another drug I'd like to highlight in this bin is axitinib. Axitinib was recently tested in Korea in the first randomized trial in ACC patients. Now, what randomized means is that some of the patients received axitinib and some of the patients received a placebo control. I think it's important to note that patients that had the placebo control, if they did progress, they were able to later take the axitinib drug. Now, what this study showed was that 75% of ACC patients that received axitinib experienced stable disease for greater than 6 months. So we view this as a really good buying time drug. This class of drugs has obviously shown some level of activity in patients and has led to them being included in both the ASCO and NCCN guidelines, which are an evidence-based recommendations that clinicians can refer to. So this class of drug is now, recommended for some recurrent metastatic ACC patients as a therapy they can consider. You can see also down the list that there's a lot of activity in immunotherapy. There has been and there continues to be. I think we're going to go through this question a little bit more in the frequently asked questions portion of the session. And then going down the list, you see even more agents that are hit for the targets, such as MIB, Notch, and other targets. So next slide. We had a lot of questions about where can I find open studies. So I want to refer you to this webpage, which is living under the treatments headline. You'll find a really nice table that goes over all of the open studies. And I think Douglas or Bojo will put this link into the chat if they haven't already. So this is one way that you can come and look and see what trials are currently open. They're organized in a couple different categories. Studies that are open to all patients, studies that are open to maybe only patients with a certain molecular alteration, such as Notch. Another way that you can make sure that you're informed on open studies is by signing up for our email updates. This is not intended, we don't intend to spam your inbox. We send out, maybe 4 or 5 email updates a year. And really in there, we're going to put things like studies that have opened, studies that have closed, and things that have reported so that you're up to date. Okay, so taking a look at this table, what's actually in there, we've tried to put as much information, without making it too complicated. And so you're going to find the compounds, the target, the sponsor, where the clinical trial is open, scientific rationale, and this is based on a combination of basic science all the way up to clinical findings for that drug in ACC patients. A link to the trial at clinicaltrials.gov, and that's where you can find, a ton more of information, such as inclusion criteria, things like that, and then the contact. This table is searchable as well as you can print it. So, this is something to consider if you want to print the next time you meet with your medical oncologist so that you don't forget. Next slide. Another web page that we really recommend you take a look at is the Find a Physician or the Physicians List. And this is living under the Living with ACC tab. So again, somebody can paste the link in the chat. So this is a tool where that lists all of the different medical providers that are relevant to an ACC patient along their journey. Importantly, again, this is a searchable table, so you can search based on country, or specialty or institution. It's again printable, and it's a living document. So all of the doctors that have been listed on here have been recommended by either a patient or another physician, and should have some experience in ACC, which we know is really important, especially for a rare cancer. Next slide. Okay, so we talked a little bit about what ACCRF has funded, the work, and how that has led to some really interesting and sound clinical trials that are currently open and that will open. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about what's ahead in the future. So these are some questions that we currently have grants to ask. So the first bullet point is really based on, we know that diagnoses can continue to be a challenge. It can be tricky. Some patients we hear of, are misdiagnosed in the salivary gland field. So we've put together a project at the University of Chicago that intends to collect over 500 different slides, ACC patient tumor slides, that have become digitalized. And then we'll be using artificial intelligence to try to explain and pick out whether there are clusters of cells or different patterns of cells that help to predict if it's an ACC diagnosis, or predict a certain type of prognosis, so maybe more aggressive disease. I think this is a great example of how ACCRF wants to continue to fund cutting edge science, and also has a nod to our researchers and our oncologists that are participating from multiple institutions to share their slides, because this is something that can be logistically challenging. And it has been so hopeful to see that our researchers really work together and are motivated to try to answer big questions. The next 2 points focus on the drug screening platforms that I mentioned, both the PDX and the three-dimensional cell culture platforms. So using those drug screening models, we want to, in the future, find new drugs that target important genomic drivers in ACC. So this is the MIB and Notch genes. And we also want to find what are the combinations of drugs that better kill ACC cells. In the next bullet point, can promising drugs that are designed for prostate cancer also work in ACC? And you may be scratching your head, how does that make sense? So in the past year or so, there have been a different type of drug, which basically delivers radiation by targeting and binding to a cell surface marker that are located on prostate cancer cells. Now, we've helped to fund some characterization studies that show that ACC cells have the same cell surface marker that is located on that prostate cancer cell. And that's not that unexpected. There are many examples of how different types of cancer cells share these cell surface markers. So we now are helping to fund a small clinical trial in Europe, which will basically test, does this drug that works in prostate cancer also work in ACC patients that have this marker? And then the last bullet, we're helping to fund a clinical trial which will ask the question, do patients that have stable oligometastasis, which is defined as 5 or fewer metastases, do they live longer if those mets are irradiated instead of just watchful waiting? And this is a trial that we're co-funding with the Gateway to Cancer Foundation and is open at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Next slide. So, none of this work would have been possible, without patient input and our leadership. It's transformed ACC research to the point where we have a really powerful research engine that is continuously pumping out good clinical trial concepts. And so patients should feel reasonably hopeful that drugs will be approved in the coming years to make ACC a manageable or possibly curable disease. So I thank you for your attention, and we're going to move into the panel discussion now.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And as I turn on my camera here, I wanted to thank everybody for the number of questions that were submitted in preparation for this webinar. We were really just so excited to see how many people registered. We had almost 300 registrants for the webinar and received almost 100 questions. So what we've done is our best effort to go through those questions and organize them by some themes, and that's what I'll be doing today. So as we're going through these discussion questions, we know there are many more, including on different topic suggestions for future webinars. So please do continue to put your questions into the chat. Thank you, Bojo, for answering those questions as we've been going along here. There's been a lot of great activity in the chat. We will ask you here in a few minutes, as Marnie alluded to, what subjects would you like us to cover in future webinars and discussions? So please, again, keep those questions coming in the chat, and we're going to do our best here to cover the ones that were the biggest themes from those that you submitted in advance of this webinar. And with that, Nikki, let me actually address the first question to you. There were a number of people who asked about a topic that Marnie touched upon at the beginning of the webinar, which is ACC inheritable? And how do you answer that for folks who are asking that question?
Great question. So, cancer is a disease that's caused by altered genes. So we talked about earlier how our sequencing studies led to the identification that the MYB gene is altered in the majority of ACC tumors. But the important thing is that this alteration is present only in the ACC tumor cells and not in the reproductive cells of ACC patients. And that means that you cannot pass an ACC tumor or the risk for an ACC tumor to your children. I think we can go one step further to say that sequencing studies makes it look like ACC is not linked with an environmental cause, with a bacterial or viral agent. So that means you can't pass ACC to your loved ones with close contact. I think that what the studies show is that it looks like these alterations in MYB and these genes are caused by random mistakes that happen when the cell is replicating.
Oh, great, thank you, Nikki. And along those lines, once somebody, unfortunately, we've all been through this, unfortunately, where either ourselves or one of our loved ones has been, or somebody we care about has been diagnosed with ACC. That's what, as Marnie mentioned, that's what brings us all to part of this club that none of us wanted to be a part of. We've received a lot of questions about after you've received that first diagnosis, and let me put this question to you, Jeff. What is the prognosis, and what is that? Is there a typical patient journey that someone should expect? We had a lot of questions about that coming in advance of the webinar.
Yeah, Douglas, that's a recurring question that's just so hard to answer. The published statistics on ACC prognosis, are incomplete. They're very variable, but that reflects all the different situations that patients find themselves in. I think we have a slide about patient journeys that, if you wouldn't mind bringing that up, I think that could be helpful to folks.
All right, is everyone able to see that now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please continue, Jeff.
Yeah, so, the way you join the club is you start in that top left corner in that box, the newly diagnosed box. And, those primaries can be, many places, often salivary glands, the mammary, lacrimal, sweat, Bartholin's gland. Most patients will have surgery at that primary site, and many will then have radiation. And that will get them to the second box that you see there, which is another situation that an ACC patient can be in, the no evident disease box. And that's actually a great place to be. That's where, about 80, perhaps 90% of patients have surgery and radiation and get local control of the primary tumor. And there's no obvious disease left in the patient. And it's possible that those patients are cured, that they will never need another treatment to deal with their ACC. There are credible statistics that show that about half of ACC patients will be in that situation where they'll have their primary tumor controlled and they will be cured. The problem is we don't know which half of those patients are cured. And so it's incredibly important as Marnie said at the beginning, to be monitored with MRIs and CT scans. Patients need, don't assume you're cured, but also don't assume the worst. At that point, this is not the, I've got arrows going here, but you could be done. Lots of patients, that could be the extent of it. Some patients may develop, kind of go into a gray zone where there's suspicious lung nodules. They're small, they might be 2 millimeters or 5 millimeters, and it's not really clear that they're ACC, because a lot of healthy patients who don't have ACC have lung nodules as well. And so it's not clear that it's ACC. Some patients could actually see those metastases grow perhaps in their lung to 1 centimeter or so. At that point, you're probably pretty sure that they are stable metastases that are sitting there. And often you still might watchful wait, but some patients might choose to have ablative treatments to deal with them. And then still other patients will see those metastases actually grow. There might be multiple metastases that really are growing, and then you're in a progressive disease situation. So this is a very long way of, well, I should say, not every situation is listed on this series of patient journeys. There are patients with inoperable disease or with local recurrences that aren't necessarily represented here. But the point is to show there's so many different situations that an ACC patient can be in, to try and distill all of that into one number for prognosis is really a silly effort. Now, that's been done, and there are a bunch of studies that describe lots of different situations for ACC. Overall, the median overall survival from diagnosis kind of ranges in the 10 to 15 years range, depending on the study. That means that half of patients will live longer than that, 10 to 15 years, many of them for much, much longer. And the other thing to keep in mind is that many ACC patients will pass away from other causes. So a patient could have ACC, but they could have a heart attack, get hit by a bus. That's going to show up as reducing the prognosis for all ACC patients. So I just warn people, don't focus so much on the numbers. Don't stress out about them. There are plenty of patients who live for a long, long time. Now,
sorry, Jeff.
Yep. The other aspect of your question was, has it changed? Has it changed over time? And has the prognosis changed over time? And sadly, we just don't have enough data to detect any clear trends in diagnosis or prognosis. My hope is that better surgical techniques, more targeted radiation, and more active drugs will get us to better prognosis over time. I don't know that we're there, but I think that with many of the new therapies that we expect to be coming out over the coming years, we should have a better prognosis over time.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I guess in the spirit of, we had a lot of questions about that watching period. We all know now to watch for buses as well. So Marnie, let me put this question to you. There were a number of questions from folks who wanted to ask about after that, especially that period after an initial surgery. What follow-up screenings should be done, how often, things of that nature. And so I'm hoping that you could maybe speak to that set of questions that we received.
Sure, that's definitely a question that we get a lot. And this is where I have to go back to, I'm not a doctor and I have no medical training. But I agree that follow-up and monitoring guidelines for ACC can really be confusing because they don't necessarily seem to be so consistent and definitive. Typically, we hear that ACC patients tend to start out, this is after original diagnosis and initial treatment, perhaps surgery and radiation, with scans every 3 to 6 months for the first maybe 1 to 5 years. And then after that, on an annual basis. Now, obviously, if there's something that needs to be monitored more closely that they discover in a scan, they're going to make them occur more frequently. In terms of what kind of scans to get, If you're monitoring the head and neck area, it tends to be an MRI is more recommended. And for the chest, lungs, abdomen, a CT seems to be the priority. And I will say that, like, it's really difficult to deal with scans emotionally for the patient, for their family, for their caregivers. And we know that there's so much anxiety, not just before every scan, but before every new ache and pain. There are people that joke that it's called scanxiety, just kind of the fear. And you know, time can definitely help with that, but realistically, the emotions are not regular and they are not rational. So I am 17 years out, and sometimes that fear is as intense as my first post-surgery scan. So, you know, I would recommend do what works for you to get through it. And it's not going to be the same for everyone, but whether you're talking to others, reaching out to family, friends, exercise, reaching out to these amazing ACC patient communities that are supporting us, talk to them, share what you're going through, and know that whatever your results are, even if they are not what you're hoped, no, we're really we're doing our absolute best to give you the best guidance and the best treatment options. We will always share what we're doing at ACCRF, what we're learning from our research, because the goal is to cure it. But I think at this point, we would all settle for staying 1 to 2 steps ahead of this very complicated disease. So that's what I can offer.
Thank you so much, Marnie. And that's absolutely true that at ACCRF, while we're focused on the research side of things, the emotional side, that is not to say it is not incredibly important. It's just not where we're focused, but absolutely there are a number of those other resources that are out there for emotional needs, and we strongly encourage you to, and that goes for caregivers as well as patients, to really be thinking about the emotional impacts and looking for that support while we're focused on the research side.
Yeah, and Douglas, actually, yeah, this would be a good point to mention. On our website, there is a peer support page which lists many of those other groups. So please go there, and we are so appreciative of all those other groups and everything they do for the community.
100%. And Jeff, I think the next set of questions that we received were a little further down the patient journey that you mentioned. And specifically, you talked on the chart, or you showed on the chart, that metastases to the lungs. There were some questions about, is that where ACC, if it's going to metastasize, does it usually go to the lungs? And if so, what are the treatment options for lung mets that you think patients should be asking their clinicians about?
So I think that I'm going to take that one. Yeah. So I'm going to start by repeating. Sorry, I'll start by repeating what Marnie said, right? We're not doctors, right? And because the risk of recurrence is high, and the factors that really, predict whether a patient will develop metastasis, are unknown. And so that means you have to get that recurrent scan, right? So that's the first step. I think another complicated piece of this is what Jeff is saying about the journey, is that lung lesions can have a variety of growth patterns, right? Some you can see stability for a time, then grow. Some people have rapid growth. And so, there's many different buckets. But I think what the question here is focusing on is, I have an actively growing lesion. What are my options? And so we're going to list, I think, a few of those. There are things like stereotactic body radiation therapy, also referred to as SBRT. And we have some web pages. I can put a link in the chat that kind of go through some of these options as well, if you want to read a little bit more. Things like brachytherapy. So this is where a clinician will actually implant a radiation seed directly into the lung lesion in the tumor. Ablative type therapies like radiofrequency, microwave, or cryoablation. Some patients consider surgery. And then we get into some systemic therapy options, which are either off-label prescription of a systemic therapy or a clinical trial. I think the big thing that we always sort of reiterate is that these different options need to be carefully considered between you and your physician, and that context probably really matters here. So, for example, how many lesions does the patient have? How fast are they growing? Where are they located? Are they located near a vital organ? What side effects is a patient willing to accept? We actually have a volunteer project that we're currently trying to sort of put together all of the different side effects that are reported in the clinical trials that were done in ACC patients, so that when you take a look at all of those completed trials and the drugs, you're looking at efficacy, right, which is partial response or stable disease, but you can also look at, well, what are the side effects that were reported, and would I consider taking a drug, or do I want to think about something different? What types of therapies are offered at your local hospital, or are you willing to travel somewhere else to get something? So I think, those are all parts of that conversation, that moving conversation that a person will have with their physician. And I think as a foundation, we start to see that systemic therapy becomes more appropriate, as your number of metastases rises, as the growth rate increases, or if the location of your met maybe precludes other treatments. So for example, has the maximum radiation dose, already been sort of set at that one lesion, and so you might have to try something different. So I think that's, important things to think about when you're starting down that road and having those conversations with your doctor.
And Nikki, let me pick up on that, because we had so many questions come in about, when should I consider a systemic therapy? When should I consider a clinical trial? Let me ask Jeff or Marnie if they want to pick up on that and add anything.
Yeah. So typically with the systemic therapy, so drugs in clinical trials, it's going to be at the stage where patients actually have progressive growing metastases. 10, 15 years ago, there were some clinical trials where patients with just stable metastases were included in trials. That is no longer the case. Now, really, it's going to be only if you have growing metastases that you'll be included in most clinical trials. So that's the appropriate patient. I think that's also the time to think about tumor profiling. Again, you can go to our website and learn about tumor profiling, where you're trying to, it's unlikely to point you to a matched targeted therapy that is going to work for you, but if it does, it might work well. So it's something to be done, something to consider. And actually, just as Nikki was kind of touching upon, there's clinical trials where you might have to travel to that, to away from home to be in a clinical trial, versus trying an off-label prescription of a drug that's approved for a different cancer and trying that. You might be able to try that at home. A lot of those drugs are fairly toxic. So each patient, we can't emphasize enough, talk to your doctor, talk to an experienced ACC medical oncologist. If you're at this stage, they can walk you through all the different options and the trade-offs and so forth. But please, talk to your doctor about it.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And Nikki, this is a really deep topic, I know, and we have we're running tight on time, but I think we'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the topic of immunotherapies, and there's so much interest in that. And if I could ask you to address that in a minute or less, which is
sure,
that's a challenge.
Yeah, immunotherapy was hot, continues to be hot, will be hot. I think what we've learned from clinical trials so far and the sequencing studies is that single agent checkpoint inhibitors that we've tested so far, like things like Keytruda, which is a PD-1 inhibitor, it's not a silver bullet in ACC. The sequencing studies show that ACC tumors are considered to be cold, which means they're really good at sort of evading the immune system. They're not recognized by the immune system. So we have to get a little bit more creative in how we're going to go after for this class of drugs in ACC. And I think the major ways that we're doing that are combination studies. So multiple checkpoint inhibitors together, combining checkpoint inhibitors with things like radiation or other systemic therapies. And then I think there are more personalized approaches. So the MIB DNA vaccine. We have things like CAR T, it was mentioned in the questions, where you're actually using a person's T cells and engineering them to now recognize markers that are specifically on the ACC tumor cell. And things like BiTEs, which actually bind part of the ACC tumor cell and help to bring the person's immune cells to the tumor cell. All of these are basically saying, how can we activate your immune system to recognize the ACC cell as foreign and get rid of it? So it's an active area of research for ACCRF.
Okay, good, great. Thank you, Nikki, and thank you for being so succinct with what I know is a complicated topic. Let me end with one final question. Obviously, there were a lot of questions, as people might have guessed, about how close are we to a cure for metastatic ACC. I know that's a really tough question, so I'm going to revisit and go with something else that was a big theme. Jeff and Marnie, you've all obviously, we've been working on this for a long time. What is one thing that you think is especially promising right now in the research? And again, thanks everybody for putting your questions in the chat. We'll continue to try to get to those. So what's one thing that you're especially excited about from the research?
You go, honey.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination. Nikki had described before how there are these self-surface markers in ACC that are that are shared with prostate cancer, and I think it's not just one option of looking at a radioligand therapy where you're attaching a radiation particle to an antibody that finds the ACC cells with that surface marker. There are other approaches where it's bringing the immune system's T cells to that same spot, and there are others. So it's really kind of a hybrid of immunotherapy with different approaches where you're bringing radiation or the immune system or chemotherapy. And I think it's kind of that crossover area that's really, really exciting, and I think will be a real growth area over the next couple of 3 years. And we have some concepts that are being developed for clinical trials on exactly those topics.
Well, thank you all. I know we're running tight on time again. So what I'll do is, I know Marnie, you had a couple of polling questions you wanted to put out to folks. We'll close this portion. We'll go back to that, and I'll go ahead and pull those polls up for you. Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you. So, and as we said, we really want this webinar to be the first in a series of ongoing discussions. So what we have done is we've pulled together 2 brief anonymous polls to get your views on the topics that are the most important to you. So the first question has been pulled up, I believe, and we're looking for 2 to 3 answers on what your most important topics are. So dealing with primary tumor site, strategies for advanced disease, radiation treatments, the biology of ACC, new treatment theory, new treatments, approaches. And if you guys can all check no more than 3 answers, that would be super helpful. And Douglas, and you think we have a lot of them? If you could pull up the results.
Well, it's great to see so many answers coming in. As soon as it slows, I'll show the results.
Thank you. And what we're looking with this is to have the next webinars really include a lot of the experts on these specific questions. So global researchers and oncologists. Well, there we have it. We've got some good results. It definitely looks like people are the most interested initially in learning about new treatments, strategies for advanced disease. So that's super helpful moving forward and kind of what our next webinar will be. Douglas, would you mind pulling up the second poll? And this is on your communication preferences. What is the way you want ACCRF to communicate with you? Is it through the website, either on a computer or mobile device, through email updates, webinars, Facebook, other social media? If you can pick 2 or 3 of your favorites here also, this is super helpful for us.
And again, great to see so many people voting. It's I am based in Saratoga Springs, New York, so I do feel like I'm watching a horse race here. So we'll see. And as soon as the polling starts to slow, I'll share the results again.
That's great. Awesome. Okay, this is good. This is really interesting. We are definitely going to have to ramp up the email updates. And I'm so excited that you guys were happy with the today's webinar, it looks like, and helpful for the future. This was a big experiment for us, and we're really excited to have them much more frequently with many more experts answering questions. If I can get one more slide, the final slide up, Douglas. Basically, we just want to tell you, like, this feedback has been amazing. A huge shout out to Dr. Bojo Todorich, who's been monitoring the chat, because questions are coming in so quickly. He's tracking them down. He's giving a lot of answers, but we know that a lot of these questions still need to be answered, and we look forward to doing that moving forward. We also would like to hear any other thoughts that you might have, either in the chat or by emailing us at any time. You know, we want to know, what did we do that worked well today? What is one thing that really worked well, and what's one thing that you really think we could improve? We're really open to your feedback. We're going to leave this chat open for quite a while after the webinar, so you know, you can take a few minutes to think about what you'd like to see differently, or what you liked that you did see today. To wrap it all up, thank you so much for taking the time to be here to learn more about ACCRF and its research efforts. I am amazed at the number of countries represented today. It's phenomenal. We hope we are serving all of your needs. We hope this was helpful for you. We really look forward to keeping this discussion going. And with that said, we hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day, your morning, your evening, whatever it may be. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm just going to add one final note here. There were a couple raised hands among participants. Those did not go unnoticed. We just don't have the ability to answer those. So if your question went unanswered and you're unfamiliar with the chat function, please use the email address that you see on your screen and don't hesitate to reach out that way. There was also one other question about sharing the chat. We will probably not be sharing the chat just because some people did put in personal medical information. But again, if you have other things that you'd like to ask us in the chat, we will be noting those for future webinars.
Thank you all so much.